Well, here we are again. Another year, another set of really great games to gush about. I'm sorry I'm late in uploading this video. Usually I have my yearly Game of the Year video up on my channel by the end of said year. But I was busy and I didn't have time to finish everything, and personally speaking, I did have to muster up a lot of motivation to actually bother to try and finish this video, which is something that I'll get to towards the end. But yeah, I decided to try and have it done before January ends. It is now February, so apologies for that. But hey, it's still early on in the new year, okay? So that's my cope, that's my excuse. So yeah, I mean, I've been gone for a while. I think the last video that I uploaded was, gosh, I think like half a year ago, but hey, no matter. In my last Game of the Year video that I made, I did promise that I would at the very least come back for another Game of the Year video for 2024. So, I want to make do on that promise, and here I am now. A little late, but here I am. 2024 was a pretty wild year for games, wasn't it? However, this year in particular was met with a lot of drama and social media fighting. This was mainly because there were some super big budget games out there that failed miserably, like Concord, LEGO Horizons, Star Wars Outlaws, Dustborn, Foam Stars, X Defiant, and Dragon Age the Veilguard, just to name a few. Usually the companies behind these games just take the L and they move on. But this year was different, because developers and their supporters, from regular fans to even the gaming press itself, they have all felt emboldened to clap back on social media and blame their favorite boogeyman, the horrible, scary, bigoted, right-wing Nazi gamers for all of these games flopping. People always repeat the phrase, if you don't like it, don't buy it. There are millions of other games out there that you can play, and you don't have to play this one if it angers you so much. Or other comments that demand that these horrible, fat, virgin Nazi gamers stop grifting on their YouTube channels and use their time on something more positive and productive in the world. But then those same people have the nerve to post the surprised Pikachu face when they find out that the people they relentlessly demonized online for years are in fact no longer paying $70 to have their pants pulled down to get fucked by these corporations without being allowed to complain, because that's transphobic now for some reason. Both game developers and game journalists constantly want to keep gaslighting people into thinking that it's somehow illegal to be negative on the internet, and that, of course, ended up being their own undoing. Be nicer is what the most toxic people on the internet are telling to you on top of the ivory tower that is their billion-dollar corporation that they're working for. Or maybe not, because it seems like a lot of the people that worked on these terrible games are now getting laid off for making games that suck. How they have yet to change their attitude after so much disaster is beyond me. If anything, it seems like they're all doubling down and tripling down on all of the things that created all of this drama and failure and layoffs to begin with. But hey, it is what it is. Needless to say, social media and the internet at large has become a much bigger battlefield than it already was. Especially after the recent US election that ended up riling everybody up, as predicted. It's full of overly dramatic and fear-mongering political talk from people that understand it about as well as children do. And then there's someone like me, who just wants to nerd out about games that I think are good. That's it. If you are sick of all the drama in the same way that I am, then I hope this video can act as somewhat of a breath of fresh air, where outside of this intro, I won't talk about any of those things and I'll keep it relatively light and not that serious. Speaking of which, there were a ton of great games this year, far surpassing the amount of bad games that came out. So let's just focus on appreciating the ones that actually got it right, instead of the ones that got shut down after only a couple weeks. If you've seen my previous Game of the Year videos, then you know the drill. I'll start by name dropping a ton of games I played this year as honorable mentions, and then I'll get to the main top 10 list, all of which are mixed up at random so nobody gets their feelings hurt because I ranked one game higher than the other. The order does not matter. All 10 of these games are awesome and come highly recommended from yours truly, a guy who has totally given up on his YouTube channel and only has like 5 people following him. Great credentials, if I had to say so myself. But before we get to that, there are 2 segments I want to add in order to address certain games that did not make the list of top 10 games of the year. The first segment I like to call games that might have made the list, but I didn't have time to play them. As the title says, there are games that I could totally see making it into the top 10, but for whatever reason, usually time constraints, I wasn't able to either play the game or play it enough in order to confidently add them to the list. The first of those games being Path of Exile 2. At the time of this recording, I have a crippling addiction to Path of Exile 1. After playing a ton of Torchlight and beating all of Diablo 3, I was hungry for yet another ARPG to sink my teeth into. I heard a lot of great things about Path of Exile 1, and it was free to play, so I decided to give it a shot. And now, I just can't stop playing it. I love it, and I don't think I'll be stopping anytime soon. I picked the perfect time to get into PoE 1, because now I could get excited for the sequel, which looks like a much better version of the same game that I am already in love with. So, Path of Exile 2 ended up coming out in early access recently, and I'm already hearing overwhelmingly positive things about it. Unfortunately, I can't add it to my Game of the Year list for a couple of reasons. Reason 1 is that I still don't want to play it until I am officially done with Path of Exile 1. And reason 2 is that you have to pay in order to get the early access to it, and I'd rather just wait for the full 1.0 release so that I can enjoy the game in its completed state, and for free on top of that. So yeah, I acknowledge that PoE 2 is super awesome and I would probably love it, but I can't in good conscience add it to my Game of the Year list without actually playing it first. And that's gonna take time. The next game I want to shout out for this category is Like a Dragon: Infinite Wealth. It came out back in January and everybody loved it. I loved it too, but I didn't actually play the game at all. Most of what I know comes from watching streamers play the game, in which I thoroughly enjoyed the story, the cutscenes, and the beautiful visuals. I had every intention in the world to sit down and devour Infinite Wealth, but I just never found the time to do so. Perhaps some other time. It is not on my list, but if I had played it myself, I probably would not hesitate to make it a part of the 10. And finally, my third game that might have been on my top 10 is Dragon's Dogma 2. For the same reasons I didn't add Infinite Wealth to the list, the same applies here. I was super excited to see the sequel finally be made. I was one of those people that was still holding on to hope that Dragon's Dogma 2 would one day come out, and lo and behold it did. I even went back and played the first Dragon's Dogma on Switch in anticipation for this release, which I kind of regret now because apparently there's a ton of bugs in it. I even experienced a few of them myself. But hey, whatever, that's not the point. The point is that the hype was building up. I heard great things about it. I was counting the days, the release date was fast approaching, and then the game came out and I just never played it. Sorry. Life happened and other stuff took away my attention, so I just never got around to playing it. I'm sure the game is great, and I've heard a lot of people say nothing but nice things about it, but this is a game I'll just have to check out some other time. And that ends that segment for games that I wanted on the list, but couldn't. And now let's move on to the next segment that I like to call The Elephants in the Room, where I'm going to acknowledge a few games that I did play that you might assume would be on my list, but they're not. And I'll explain why. I should probably rename this segment to the part that is going to piss everybody off, because that's basically what this will be. So, let's just go ahead and pull the band-aid off quickly, make sure that the torches and pitchforks come out in full force, and I'll just get to the point, alright? I mean, I say that, but I know for a fact that this video is gonna get like 10 views, so actually, like, who cares? The first elephant in the room I need to talk about is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. This is the game that I assume will be Game of the Year for a lot of you. So many people loved this game and think it's the greatest thing ever, but I'm sorry, I just don't feel the same. In fact, the more I played of Rebirth, the angrier I got, and the more I wanted to put it down and never play it again. Which is weird, because I recall loving Final Fantasy VII Remake. I thought that the $60 that I paid for that was absolutely worth it, meanwhile the $70 that I paid for Rebirth did not feel worth it. I thought the previous installment was great, even though that game had its own fair share of problems. But Rebirth, it just wasn't hitting in the same way. There are so many things that piss me off about Rebirth. It's like the perfect compilation of every single thing I hate about modern day game design, in addition to Square Enix fumbling the ball on the Final Fantasy VII story by either making it so needlessly complicated or just making these stupid changes that do nothing but sand down the edges of the original. And there's so much time-wasting filler in this game, it's unbelievable. Remake felt like a flawed but ultimately solid Yakuza game. But Rebirth felt more like all of the worst parts of a Far Cry game. It even has climbing up towers and yellow paint and everything. It didn't help that they recycled a bunch of characters from Remake as well, bringing back a bunch of, like, literally whatever who cares characters. Like, anybody was going to look forward to seeing the hand massage lady again, or the random Shinra salaryman, or the phantom thief lady, or fucking Chadley, who seems to be an omnipresent god that just exists everywhere, and appears in all places like he's Q from Star Trek or something. He even has his own menu tab, for fuck's sakes. It's just like, items, weapons, map, Chadley. It's so weird. I hate that Square Enix has, like, this obsession with this character. Playing the story felt like I was slogging through a season of The Simpsons where I kept seeing the same 10 characters get brought back, you know, like, oh, there's Krusty the Clown again, oh, and there's Ned Flanders for the 10 billionth time, there's Bumblebee Man, oh look, there's Kyrie, there's Shinra Businessman, there's all of these boring characters that you never gave a shit about, but here they are again, and they're gonna be in the third game as well, so you better look forward to that. Oh, and don't even get me started on how the fucking game ends, and like, alright, okay. So, sure, look, the graphics are amazing, and the soundtrack is beautiful to listen to, and the combat is not the worst, but the rest of the game makes me want to tear my fucking hair out and say, what were they thinking, like I'm the angry video game nerd. I'm sorry, I really tried to see the positives. I really wanted with every single fiber of my being to love this game, because I loved Remake, but I just didn't like Rebirth. I could make a whole video essay on why I think this game is the biggest letdown ever, but I think I've angered people enough with what I've already said. I think I'll just direct your attention to other people that have already broken this game down for me, and they also say even worse things about it than I ever would, so yeah, they say everything that I was thinking in a much better way. So go ahead and just watch those video essays, because yeah, if you're gonna throw the pitchfork somewhere, don't have it be here, have it be somewhere else where people are brave enough to say what I don't dare to say. So yeah, FF7 Rebirth, I thought I was gonna love it, I ended up kinda hating it, so yeah, it is what it is. The next elephant in the room that I want to address is Persona 3 Reload, another remake. If you know anything about me, then you probably know that I love the Persona series. And in fact, Persona 3 specifically is one of my favorite video games of all time. So anyone would assume that I would go crazy for the remake, right? That I would just play it immediately and cry tears of joy like all of those people that cry at Star Wars trailers. Well, that's what I thought too, but that never happened. I played as much as I could of Persona 3 Reload. I even tried playing the expansion pass content. And I concluded that it's not a bad game at all, but it just wasn't doing it for me. For anybody that played this game for the first time without knowing anything from the original, I'm sure you're gonna think this game is mad peak, yo, but for me it felt like a Persona 5 mod that made everything blue instead of red. A lot of the unique identity that made Persona 3 the game that it is has either been removed, changed, censored, or excessively stylized because Persona 5 did it, so now this game has to be that too. Just like when Persona 4 was popular, so then Persona 3 had to be like Persona 4 too. I don't like the new English voices at all, so I switched to the Japanese ones that still preserved all of the original voice actors. I don't like that they changed the circular revolver chamber UI. I don't like that a lot of the animated cutscenes got replaced with shittier 3D versions with worse dialogue. I don't like the Tartarus. The one thing that I would have actually liked for them to change, goddammit, is still relegated to empty, boring hallways with different colors for 90 hours of your playtime. But hey, there's a treasure chest that you can open sometimes, isn't that cool? I also didn't like that the Answer campaign was not in the game by default. So on top of the $70 that you have to pay, there's an additional charge for a season pass full of the same recycled DLC that they always put out with these games. I also hate that every single tiny little thing I do needs a transitional animation or voice-acted lines and menus. The Velvet Room is a perfect example of this, where I always have to see my character walk through the door, see the transition, and everything I click on is always met with either Igor or Elizabeth saying something every single time for 90 hours. Every single little movement has to have some comment from them. And when you're done, you have to transition back, see your character walk outside, another little transition, and then you can keep playing. Why does this game feel so entitled to waste my time? Persona 3 Reload pisses me off because when looking at the big picture, it is a perfectly solid Persona game, and most people will not complain, especially those that didn't play the original because they don't know any better. But when looking closer, you can see a pile of tiny little problems that compound into each other that resulted in me just putting the game down and never picking it back up again. And believe me, I tried really hard to like this game, but I just can't lie to you. I can't lie to you about the way that I felt playing it, and that's just how it is. After this game came out, people were saying that there's no point in going back and playing the original, because the shiny new game does everything better, and aside from being able to control all the party members, which the PSP game already did, I could not disagree more. That quote-unquote better that people talk about is mainly stripping away the identity and the edge of the original in favor of whatever the newer and more trendy modern thing is. And this is not the first time that Atlus tries to rewrite history on their own games. Once upon a time, Persona 4 was the most popular installment, so every other game had to retroactively be just like Persona 4, whether it was the aesthetic, the soundtrack, or the cast of characters. And then Persona 5 came out and became super popular and mainstream, so now any newer game has to be exactly like Persona 5. And you want to know something else? Whenever Persona 6 decides to come out, the same thing will happen again. And one day, Persona 2 is finally going to get that remake that people have been asking for, and it's not going to feel like Persona 2 at all. Why? Because they will make it look like whatever Persona 6 ends up being. And that is my problem with Persona 3 Reload, and why I never considered putting it on my Game of the Year list. The next elephant in the room I want to talk about is the Dragon Quest III HD 2D remake. There we go, we have a trilogy of disappointing remakes. I hate to sound like a broken record, but I will say it again. I am a massive Dragon Quest fan, so anyone would assume that I would love this game right off the bat, right? Well, sadly no. I didn't enjoy this game as much as I thought I would. I do think it's good, and definitely better than most games, and I would say it's better than Persona 3 Reload, and it's better than Final Fantasy VII Remake, but just like the other two remakes that I talked about, this one also changes a bunch of things that bring the experience down for me. For one, I've never really liked the addition of voice acting in any of these HD 2D games. Something about these epic fantasy character voices coming out of these tiny little sprite characters simply doesn't feel right to me. In other games, like Persona 4, where the character models look like that, they have much nicer character portraits with more detail that represents their voices with changing expressions. Another example is the Legend of Heroes games, where the characters almost look like chibi claymation characters from far away, but whenever they talked, you could see a portrait and know what they actually look like. I think it works a lot better this way, as opposed to these HD 2D games that don't have that, and it feels kind of unnatural and out of place. It's almost like when you're watching a movie being dubbed over in another language, or listening to an adult male voice coming out of a baby's mouth. And even if the existence of voices didn't bother me, I really don't like the English voices and much prefer the Japanese ones. The Japanese ones are just far less annoying and grating than the English ones that insist on doing the stereotypical accents for all of the different cultures in the game, including doing the whole like every third word I speak is in a different language kind of thing. And yes, I know that in the Japanese version they use a bunch of different dialects too, and they use accents and slang terms that we wouldn't understand in English, but as I said, the sound of it is far less annoying to listen to than the English voices trying to do Italian accents where they're like, "Oh, my bambino, this problem is bigger than my mom's pastaccini ravioli." And like, just shut up, all of you. I'm gonna switch you over to the Japanese ones, gosh. Another issue I had is that when we got our first look at some gameplay years ago, it had this interesting moving camera angle, and the menus had this mystical glow to it that I thought it was great. But now that the game is out, you can instantly notice that all of that was removed and changed for something significantly more boring. Now you have this perspective, with really small sprites that leave a ton of empty space on screen. Your own characters are at the very bottom that you can barely see because the menus are covering them most of the time. It's such a waste seeing such good pixel art be covered up like that. It's like a woman that only wears sweaters getting a boob job. It's like, dude, I can't see anything, what's the point? Just have it be a first-person perspective like in the original games. Or have it like how you did it before, with a different camera angle that then transitions into first person when you're ready to attack. Why they changed it to look like it currently does is beyond me. Oh, and the menus don't glow anymore, so boo-hoo for me. The combat is also so horrendously slow. The ultra fast speed is the only one that should exist, because anything slower than that proved to be unbearable. I'll never know why they thought that the extremely slow normal speed was a good idea, and I say normal speed in like massive air quotes because it's like playing the game in slow motion. Another thing that really bothered me was that the dialogue treated you like you're a brain-dead moron, explaining in detail everything that you're supposed to be doing and where you're supposed to go next, with objective markers, objective reminders in the menus, detailed maps of everywhere including dungeons, and even hitting you with those awful tacky PowerPoint slides that explain how the game works, despite no other version of Dragon Quest III needing any of these things in order to be considered one of the greatest games ever made. Yes, I know I can turn off the objective markers at the start, but everything else that I mentioned stays the same and cannot be turned off, which is still annoying. This is bad because being told exactly what to do at all times doesn't encourage the player to explore, talk to people, and get lost in a good way, to be resourceful under your own terms. In all of the previous versions, you could just engage in conversations with NPCs, that's what they're there for. You can keep some quotes handy with the recall feature and then figure out where to go next, entirely on your own. You feel smart and useful that way. And when you're in dungeons without a map, you could wander around and bump into treasure chests with cool stuff in them. But when you do have a map, you'll be able to see every single dead end ahead of time and not bother going there because anyone would prefer to find a way out as soon as possible instead. Oh, and there's also the zoom spell, which was changed in a way that completely breaks the game. Never mind that there's a difficulty option that literally does not allow you to die ever, but the zoom spell also makes everything extremely easy. To begin with, it doesn't cost you any magic points at all for you to use it, so there's no stress or strategy involved to use it as a last resort. In addition, you can use the spell indoors now, which is different from literally any other game in the franchise. Maybe there's like one other game that does this. The spell is supposed to launch you up into the sky to take you to a previously visited location. So there's this joke that if you try to use it indoors, you hit your head on the ceiling and you can't go anywhere. Not only is this a funny joke that adds to the atmosphere of the game, but it also adds a layer of danger to your adventures. Knowing that you can't just teleport out of a dungeon means that you have to strategize and really think about how you're going to use your resources to survive an area until you can find a way out, and then you can fly out of there. It can make parts of the game more exciting and memorable, knowing that you made it out of a dangerous situation. But now all of that tension has evaporated because you can just press a button that teleports you out of any danger no matter where you are. And knowing that you can just go to your mom's house to sleep on a bed for free to heal yourself like it's a fucking Pokemon game, then there's literally no reason whatsoever for you to waste your money on an inn ever. Why do hotels even exist anymore? And it also doesn't give you any reason to talk to the people that are there either. You can just teleport to mom's house and then teleport directly back into the dungeon, because that's something that you can do now, as opposed to teleporting to the nearest town and then finding a hotel, paying for it, talking to the people there, finding some goodies, and then you're good to go. It's almost like you're experiencing an adventure away from home, as opposed to something where you can just teleport back to mommy's place the moment something bad happens. Not much of a heroic, risky, life-threatening adventure to me. And there's also these little sparkly bits in the overworld that they added that are full of healing items and weapons, making the game even easier still. Are you guys starting to see how all of these modern day conveniences break the design of the original game? How these quality of life improvements and accessibility changes are actually going to be the thing that kill the game the fastest? It just forces everybody to play in baby mode when you're not encouraged to do anything risky, interesting, or spontaneous. Everything has to be expected and explained ahead of time for the mainstream audience that's going to look at this game and say, wait a minute, Dragon Quest III? Does that mean I have to play 2 other games for me to understand the story? I don't want to do all that. I'm not going to buy this game. Also, look at it. It's all pixely like an old game. I don't want to play an old game. $60 for a game made for grandpa? I'm not going to play that. I'm just going to play Call of Duty because it's more modern and it looks like a Hollywood movie. I wonder why Kevin Spacey doesn't show up to these anymore. When that happens, the rest of the fans will stay here, stuck with all of these changes that were not intended for them. They were intended for the people that didn't even care to play this anyway, because it looks old and it's not the cool Final Fantasy thing that they already know. Speaking of things that I don't care for, I also don't like the censorship done to the official art, and the censoring of genders at the beginning, which I think is just silly, because immediately after you make your choice, the protagonist character is referred to as either a hero or a heroine. So there's literally no point to all of that type A, type B nonsense. Even the creators themselves thought that it was stupid, but they were forced to do it. I also don't like some of the changes done to the script because of localization forcing things to be more inoffensive and more gender neutral, but that could be a whole ass video in and of itself. And other people have made videos about it. Speaking of bad changes, the monster medals and the extra bosses from the Game Boy Color version don't exist here. The opening from the Game Boy version also doesn't exist here. It actually got changed to be random flashbacks that appear throughout the game. And that one Mario Party style board game that older versions had is also not in this. Betting on monsters at the Coliseum also doesn't exist here, and got replaced with a monster arena similar to Dragon Quest VIII. This edition is not bad at all, but I don't understand why we couldn't just have both. Just like with Persona 3 Reload, I've been hearing people say that this newer version of Dragon Quest III is the definitive version, and it is therefore unnecessary for you to go back and play any of the older versions, but I don't agree with that at all. As I said before, there's a ton of content missing from this version, which is super disappointing. And a lot of the changes make the game so incredibly easy and idiot-proof that there's almost no point in playing the game at all if you've tried out other versions that may not be as visually pleasing, but are definitely much more satisfying to engage with. Mostly because they are designed to be engaged with, as opposed to this remake that seems to be more than happy to just let you coast by without really thinking a whole lot. And besides, I will never consider a version of Dragon Quest III to be definitive when they leave the nun in Eliahan outside in the cold, because the fucking Walmart pre-order bonus chest was much more deserving of a roof over its head than the NPC that's been there since forever. Look at that nun praying for peace in the world as she gets left out in the dust. She lets you save your progress without having to waste your time going to the king's castle, and this is how you treat her? Shameful. That's why Dragon Quest III HD 2D Remake will never be on my list of games of the year for any year. It could have been a lot worse, but my god, it could have been a lot better too. Okay, the next elephant in the room I want to address is Eiyuden Chronicle 100 Heroes. This is another game that I was really hyped for. It came out, I played it a bunch on Game Pass, and I just didn't like it. The story was extremely boring, the characters weren't interesting, and the combat wasn't as good as the original Suikoden games. I mean, visually it looks pretty cool, but, you know, gameplay-wise, design-wise, it just wasn't hitting for me. The translation and localization for this game was laughable at launch. There were a ton of bugs, it was just a mess. And even when the mess was cleaned up, it was still pretty bad on a fundamental level. Of course, the game looks visually amazing. I still love seeing this game in motion, but that's not enough to carry the whole experience. I was really looking forward to this game, and I do feel bad that the original Suikoden creator died before being able to see his own game come out after so many years of making it. But sadly, I came out of it completely disappointed. I don't want to lie out of pity because the creator died. I gave it a chance, and I just don't think it's a good game. I would rather recommend Suikoden 1 and 2 100 times more, which, by the way, those are getting remastered and are coming out this year, I'm pretty sure, so just, you know, use your money on buying those instead. And now, my final elephant in the room I want to address is Hades 2. I fucking love Hades 2, in the same way that I loved Hades 1. It's an enormous game that, despite being in early access, contains more content than Hades 1 ever did, with even more coming in the future. The combat is awesome, the dialogue with all of the characters is just as memorable and well thought out as before. The art is amazing, at least the ones that don't have placeholder images, and the soundtrack continues to blow me away, so if I love it so much, why not put it on the list? Well, mainly because it's in early access. That usually doesn't stop me from adding it, but with Hades 2 in particular, I know this game will be so much better than it already is if I just wait for the full release. I think it's worth holding back a bit in favor of playing a more complete game that has already proven itself to be very, very good. When it reaches 1.0, I will most certainly revisit this game and put it on my 2025 Game of the Year list if I ever bother to make it by then. But yeah, it's only a matter of time. Okay, so that's all of the elephants in the room properly addressed. My apologies if I angered you with my hot takes on Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, or Persona, or whatever. I'm just being honest with how I feel, and I thought it'd be good to give you an explanation for why these very popular and beloved games are just not on my list. Call me a contrarian or whatever, but that's just how I feel. And now, let's get into the honorable mentions. These are a bunch of games I played throughout the year that I enjoyed enough to recommend, so here they are. Another Crab's Treasure, Atlas, Mouthwashing, Marvel Rivals, Silent Hill 2, Metro Awakening VR, Thank Goodness You're Here, UFO 50, Dark and Darker, the Tsukihime Remake, Fantasian Neo Dimension, Blaze Blue Entropy Effect, Another Code Recollection, Arctic Eggs, Fitness Boxing Hatsune Miku Edition, Ace Attorney Investigations Collection, Mullet Matt Jack, Robobeat, Deep Rock Galactic Survivor, Anton Blast, Mario and Luigi Brothership, the Marvel vs. Capcom Collection, which is literally just a bunch of old games packed into a newer box. Kinda makes you wonder why this game was nominated for Best Fighting Game of the Year. It's literally just the Marvel vs. Capcom games re-released again. That's, yeah, weird. Anyway, Zelda Echoes of Wisdom, Mini Shoot Adventures, Braid Anniversary Edition, Yellow Taxi Goes Vroom, Super Monkey Ball Banana Rumble, Romancing Saga 2 Revenge of the Seven, Helldivers 2, Luigi's Mansion 2, Paper Mario 2 Switch Remake, Under Night in Birth 2, World of Goo 2, Swarm 2, Tekken 8, my god, those were a lot of games with 2 at the end, Sulaco, Prince of Persia The Lost Crown, the Rogue Prince of Persia, Bunny Garden, Sandland, Pal World, Pepper Grinder, Grand Blue Fantasy Relink, Mario vs. Donkey Kong the Remake, Unicorn Overlord, Dragon Ball Sparking Zero, Rise of the Ronin, Black Myth Wukong, Stellar Blade, Tales of Kenzera Zhao, Dr. Robotnik's Ring Racers, What the Car, Behemoth, and finally, Underdogs. And those are all of my honorable mentions. Now, let's get to the true meat of the video. Finally, we've been talking for like 40 minutes. Now we're finally getting to the top 10 games of 2024 for me. I won't make it wait any longer. Let's get straight to it. My number 10 game of the year goes to Zenless Zone Zero. This one might come as a shock to some of you, since I've been very vocal about how much I dislike free-to-play live services. I believe the vast majority of them are not worth playing, because their business models are predatory, the gameplay is usually non-existent, and if it doesn't get enough money or support, these games get shut down and all of that work goes to waste, essentially becoming lost media that can never be accessed again. And recently, most gacha games have been carried by prominently featuring anime waifus so that horny people like myself can fork out money to get the super special swimsuit edition of whatever character we end up liking, even though the game itself tends to be pretty shallow. On principle, I tend to not mess with live service games at all, but even I have to admit that they have become much bigger and more relevant with every year that passes. This is mainly due to the enormous success of Genshin Impact and the incredibly high standard that Hoyoverse has set for other companies to be able to compete. This is a good thing, since now there are far less of these generic three-wave battle systems where the game plays itself. And now we have bigger releases with better stories and actual gameplay that isn't there purely to scam you through anime waifus or driving you crazy with timers. Do you guys remember that Diablo mobile game? Or like The Simpsons Tapped Out? Or like the Family Guy game where it was all just timers upon timers upon timers? The technology for 3D models and animations have improved drastically as well, which I found exciting to see, especially when realizing that these are all mobile games that are supposed to run on your phone. So I eventually gave in and decided that I was going to look for one singular live service game to spend my time with. No more than that. Just one. And I got really picky over what I wanted. I eventually landed on Zenless Zone Zero, and I'm glad that I've stuck with it ever since the first day that it launched one day before my birthday. I really love this game. It scratches every single itch I had for an urban-style anime action game with great characters and an interesting story with one of my favorite aesthetics in video games, which is basically anything that looks like Jet Set Radio or Jet Set Radio Future. Out of all of the games that I have on this list, Zenless is definitely the one I've played the most. mainly because I check in with it every day and get engrossed at the metric ass ton of content on display. It doesn't matter what day it is or how many missions I get done, there's always a wide variety of stuff to do. There are even some occasions where you get an entirely different game within the already existing game, like tower defense levels, puzzles, a restaurant management story, arcade games, and even a Fall Guys mode, and a ton more. Doing so much with so many people makes walking around the city fun and feel more real and lived in. I've attached myself to these characters with every new day I log in to see what everyone is up to. All of these activities are accompanied with great looking graphics, memorable characters, and fun stories that are voice acted in a handful of languages of your choice. I personally like playing the game in Japanese, and sometimes I switch it around to Chinese or Korean, but the Japanese one is my default choice. The combat is super simplistic. It's definitely nothing on the level of Devil May Cry or Bayonetta, but it is still fun and visually pleasing, and it can occasionally be challenging in its own way, even though that just, culminates to a bunch of bosses being super bullet spongy, and you're just out there mashing the square button for like an hour. The visuals, especially the story cutscenes, are by far my favorite thing in this game. I am consistently mind blown at how incredibly good looking these scenes look, and I certainly wouldn't mind if there was a movie in the future that looked like this. Of course, the game is not perfect, and I do have some criticisms. The most obvious one is that this is still a free-to-play game at the end of the day, so you will bump into some struggles with the gacha, or having to grind missions for a long time so that you can have the resources necessary to do more gacha, or to level up characters that are super high level, but it was rare for me to get to that point, admittedly. I usually have enough of what I need, but there are occasions where it's like, alright, I need to level up this character all the way to level 60, and all of my resources combined only gets me to like halfway to that point, so it just involves more grinding, and it's just a time sink after a certain point. And of course, they do that on purpose so that you can go to their online store and spend a bunch of money on resources so you can buy your way into getting all of the best stuff in the game, and I'm just so against that even if it is Zenless Zone Zero, I still don't give in. I've put in almost 200 hours into this game and I have not given them a single penny, and I plan to keep it that way. Another issue is the combat. Even though it's very pretty looking, it is, as I said before, very kind of shallow and simplistic. It's definitely nothing on the levels as other action games that I mentioned, but it technically doesn't have to be. I mean, you are supposed to be playing this game on your phone, so if it gets too complicated, it can make the phone controls a little too complicated. It can occasionally be challenging, and learning how to parry and how to use all of your characters' abilities effectively, and there are 3 characters that you can have at a time, so you can combine all of these different ones to have good combos, but I would appreciate it if the fights were a little bit more than just pressing square and occasionally triangle until all of the bad guys go away. There's also a bunch of other issues that I didn't mention, but I'll stop here. Even with that, I did still enjoy my time a lot, and I plan to continue following this game to see what else it has in store for the future. I'm not much of a live service guy, but when I am, I play Zenless Zone Zero. My number 9 game of the year is 9 Souls. This one came out of nowhere for me. I saw so many people complain in the comments section of many other videos begging others to try out 9 Souls. They said that it was amazing, and unlike any other game this year. I knew nothing about it, but I ended up trying it out because it came out on Xbox Game Pass. And now, reporting back after playing through it, I can confirm that all of those people hyping the game up were absolutely right. 9 Souls is fantastic, and it'll break my heart knowing that no bigger organization or event of influence will ever talk about it. When you boot the game up, you will instantly get the urge to call it a Hollow Knight clone, but I can assure you that 9 Souls does a lot to differentiate itself. For one, the combat is more similar to Sekiro than anything else, involving a lot of parrying and getting super comfortable with enemy pattern recognition. The game is deliberately designed to not let you get away with just mashing buttons. You will quickly get punished for doing that, and learn that you have to be more methodical with how you do things. When you do, there's a beautiful ebb and flow to the combat that, if you're good enough, it will look almost like a choreographed cutscene that you're a part of. It's a difficult game, but a very satisfying one to master. Outside of the combat, I thought the story was great, with a bunch of lore to read if that's what you enjoy. If there is a criticism that I can give to the game is that there is a lot of that, like, look for documents and then read a wall of text that explains a lot of the lore. I usually don't like that in any game, even games that I like, like Doom 2016 is a really good one, where you have a really fun game and then you just have this info dump. buried inside all of these documents and stuff that you're never going to look at. And so, yeah, Nine Souls does have a lot of that, has a lot of just sitting around and reading. But, even if the lore is interesting, I find myself just kind of skipping through it. I'd rather not spoil what happens early on, but I will say that it surprised me quite regularly. The visuals are simple, but effective, and the soundtrack still plays in my head after I'm done playing. If you have Game Pass or would rather support the developers directly, then please give Nine Souls a try. It's one of those sleeper hits that went under people's radar, but those that played it loved it, so be sure you're one of those people that didn't miss out. And now, Game of the Year number 8 goes to Astro Bot. As someone who already played through the original VR Astro Bot game and Astro's Playroom, I already knew this game was going to be good, but it still managed to surpass my expectations, especially when comparing it to other games out on PlayStation this year that were nowhere near as good. This might be weird for me to say, but one of the reasons I love Astro Bot so much is because it reminds me of Nintendo. I mean, even Reggie Fils-Aimé was in an interview recently saying that Astro Bot almost beat Nintendo at its own game, and it shows. It has that family-friendly charm to it that anybody can get into. It has a high level of quality and attention to detail, made by people that sincerely love their history and love platformers. Every single level exudes just pure happiness, fun, and joy at all times. It is positive and welcoming in a way that is not preachy, pretentious, or insincere, like many other games that I could name this year. It is the complete opposite of all of the cynicism that we usually have to tolerate. It's like comparing a fake nice guy versus an actual genuine nice guy. A nice guy that designed very good levels with creative ideas attached to the majority of them, all while running flawlessly on the PlayStation 5 with no issues that I could find. If there is anything that I can desperately reach for as a criticism, is maybe all of the references to older PlayStation stuff. I mean, some people might view all of the themed bots as key jangling for the sake of nostalgia, but I would say that's really stretching it. When you live in a world where the leadership at Sony says that they don't have that many big franchises to work with, and after such massive failures recently, I think it was appropriate to have a game that acts as a wake-up call to everyone saying, hey, we do have a rich history. We have all of these iconic franchises that a ton of people love, and we're doing nothing with them. With the goal of sending that message, I think all of these references and bots with different characters on top of them, they definitely justify their own existence. I think if the game itself was bad, and all you had were those references, then that would be worth criticizing, because then you would be relying on nostalgia to act as a crutch that will carry players to the end. But that's not the case here. If all of the themed bots disappeared, you would still have a fantastic game in your hands. And that's kind of proven with the previous Astro Bot games that don't have as many references as this one has, and those are still great. Because of that, the bots act as a nice reward for playing, instead of it being the main attraction, which is how it should be, and I'm glad the developers understand that. Some people took issue with how beloved this game is, because games that normally get nominated or win Game of the Year are the super high budget kind that can be played for hundreds of hours with realistic graphics and cinematic cutscenes. I mean, something like the ones that I mentioned before, right? Like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and all those kinds of games. It's unusual for a super family-friendly platformer that you can beat in around 10 hours to take the world by storm. And yes, I mean, it's unusual, but that's only a bigger testament to how great the game is, and how good it made everybody feel when they played it. As I said, is that Nintendo charm, that little Nintendo touch of gold. If anything, it was a breath of fresh air amidst the horrible stench of all of the other disappointments of this year. My number 7 Game of the Year is Fate Stay Night Remastered. I had a hard time deciding whether I wanted this or the Tsukihime remake to be on my Game of the Year list. I love both games equally, but Fate Stay Night is the one game that ended up kinda resonating with me just a little bit more. After playing through Witch on the Holy Night and loving it, I was very excited to play Tsukihime and Fate Stay Night for the first time, officially in English. I am happy to report that none of these games disappointed me. They were both great games, especially Fate Stay Night. Fate, as a franchise, is such a cultural phenomenon in Japan and extremely popular with anime fans, and now I can finally see why that is the case, after playing the visual novel that started it all. Yes, this is the game where Saber, Shido, Ilya, Tosaka Rin, and a whole bunch of other characters come from. It's difficult to talk about visual novels without spoiling stuff and just saying, "The writing is so good, man," without actually explaining how. But because the Fate franchise is so massive, then you'll likely already know what to expect in terms of the characters that appear, what the setup for the story is, and what the quality of the writing is like, which kept me glued to the screen for longer than I thought. So I already had experience with Fate games and Fate anime before, but they were mostly spin-offs and they assumed that you already knew a lot of the lore going into it. So a lot of the references were lost on me. From what I once thought to be an incomprehensible story where I never knew what was going on, now I get it, and I think it's awesome. I love how detailed it gets in terms of describing the scene, small gestures that the characters make, and going into exciting detail when fights happen. I assumed that fight scenes would be boring, since they are mainly just PNG images with walls of text on top of them. But surprisingly, it wasn't boring at all. It's written in a way where your imagination does a lot of the work in a good way. A bad way would be when there's very little detail, and you just have to make up solutions in your head for things that a game doesn't acknowledge or cover. But here, it's the complete opposite. You can actually have a fairly clear image in your head about what's happening because of how well written the text is in Fate Stay Night. I also appreciate that all of the original art for the game is still intact. Knowing that Tsukihime was getting a remake, I was expecting this to also get a similar facelift, but no. This is actually just a fairly straightforward remaster that adds quality of life updates where it needs it, which is mainly anything that's menu related, like saving or getting into the log so that you can go back to previous lines of dialogue in case you missed anything. I would not have minded if this game got remade as well, but I do think I prefer being able to preserve the original artwork and present it to modern day audiences that are experiencing Fate for the first time. Because it's a visual novel, some people might say that this doesn't count as a game, but I don't think this should stop you from engaging with it anyway. If it means anything to you, there are branching paths and multiple endings you can get, both good and bad. And if that's the quote-unquote failure state that you need in order to count this as a game, then hey, it's there. If you're curious about the Fate franchise and want to finally make sense out of all of that confusing lore, then hey, please check this out. I already think that more people should be playing more visual novels anyway, and I think this is a great place to start. If you end up liking it, it will open up the doors for you to enjoy many other games under the Fate brand. Game of the Year number 6, Legendary Tales on PlayStation VR 2. Of course, I'm a really big fan of VR games, so I was bound to have at least one on my list. I played a bunch of VR titles in 2024, but I honestly wasn't all that impressed with most of them. I saw the trailer for Legendary Tales and I thought that it'd be just okay, but I was wrong. It actually ended up being one of my favorite VR games on PSVR 2. Granted, it's not as polished or as good looking as other VR games like Behemoth for example, but the fun gameplay carries the whole thing for me. Legendary Tales is basically a miniature Dark Souls game with a little bit of Diablo sprinkled on top. What I mean by this is that you're in a dark and violent medieval fantasy world where you slowly fight monsters and explore everything while picking up a ton of loot, like weapons, items, and crafting stuff so that you can make even more stuff. This game also has Skyrim-like RPG elements. You can create a character with points that you can allocate whenever you get enough experience to level up. However, kinda like in Skyrim, the things that you can actually level up will depend on how often you use certain abilities, like melee attacks, magic, or shooting things with a bow and arrow. So for example, if you find yourself defeating a ton of enemies only by swinging your sword more than anything else, then those are the kind of upgrades that you will have access to the most. And if you do the opposite, if you're instead killing a ton of enemies with magic, then most of your upgrades will be magic related. I found it fun to create multiple characters with different priorities as I traveled this warp game. If you guys don't know what warp game means, there's a pretty silly way that the game describes itself. This game is, how do I say this? It's like categorized as a walking, action, role-playing game. So warp, W-A-R-P. If you're on PlayStation 5 and you just see like the little opening screen before launching the game, it says it right there. It's like a warp game. It's very silly. Imagine having to create an entire subgenre for a video game as a way to excuse the horrendously slow walking speed. Because that's a thing in this game. You move at a snail's pace. Maybe they were trying to protect people from like motion sickness and stuff like that, but it's simply the worst part of the game, to me. I can handle the crappy looking menus, and the almost non-existent story, and even the awkward interactions with NPCs, but I simply cannot forgive how slow the movement is. Even the sprint button that is supposed to help you go faster is still not fast enough for me. I wish they would update the game someday, so that you're given the option to speed things up by a lot. But anyway, everything else that's not that is pretty good. As I said, the gameplay is the best part. It's similar to Dark Souls in that you can't just hack and slash your way through enemies. You have to be patient and wait for moments to parry and counterattack. It takes a little bit of time to get used to it, but as soon as you start to get a groove going and kind of predicting where the enemy is going to attack and how to properly parry, it feels awesome having to fight enemies and bosses with everything you learn as you play and fail and get back up and try again. And just like Dark Souls, it's a pretty challenging game, with bonfires and everything that you can use to heal yourself. But every time I died was a new opportunity for me to prepare potions, blacksmith new weapons, or cook food that I can use to do better in my next attempt. All of this is done with your hands, by the way. There are little to no menus involved in crafting all of these things. And so it ends up being really immersive and fun to have everything planned out and then set things in motion in your campsite with your own two hands. You're out there hammering the sword, you're putting it on the water and then on the furnace, you're even creating your little handle that's made out of wood, so you have to make the shape of the handle out of a plank of wood. It's actually kind of cool. When you're making potions, you have these little crystals and you can mix them around and you can see the little juice squirt out and put it on a container. Put it in one of your slots so that you can pull it out whenever you want and then drink it like it's an actual drink. It's simply so much more satisfying, and just clicking stuff on a menu and getting new items like how you would in other games simply isn't as fun. When you're in VR, you just want to do all of that stuff manually. Now don't get me wrong, Legendary Tales does have its own fair share of issues, and there are some moments where you do need menus, like when you level up and you allocate points and you're messing around with your inventory. Some of the stuff that's there is not super intuitive, but I don't know, just the whole atmosphere of the game and exploring and everything, I just found myself really vibing with it. And if you're also looking for something immersive and challenging where its VR status adds to the experience, then I think this one is worth checking out, at least on a sale. You can also play co-op online with one other friend. Now, I never did this, but you can probably get a lot more fun out of that too if you can find someone to play with. Game of the Year number 5 goes to Animal Well. Probably one of the best games to come out this year. From the first time I saw this game be presented by the one-man developer, I knew that we were in for something good. Especially when it got to the part where he said that there were going to be a bunch of puzzles in this game that would take people years to figure out. I thought the pixel art was gorgeous right off the bat, and the atmosphere was on point. I loved the sound of it, and the gameplay looked like it was going to be something really unique. And then the game came out, and it actually surpassed the expectations that I had for it. All 34 megabytes of it. This game is incredibly well designed, with a ton of puzzles that are very fun to figure out. And even if you can't figure them out, you can go somewhere else and likely find a new item or unlock something that will help you with that puzzle you got stuck with before. The items themselves are very charming, creative, and fun to use in a variety of different situations. And they even recontextualize older sections of the map. You start solving puzzles that you didn't even know existed in that level. Any normal game will give you something like a grappling hook, a gun, or bombs, just stuff like that. But here, they equip you with a frisbee, a slinky, a flute, and bubbles. And yes, it turns out that there's a lot that you can do with that. All of this is done with zero text or dialogue as well, which makes it a pretty universal game that's accessible to anyone with eyeballs. Speaking of no text, the puzzles don't have any explanation or tutorials either, and I love that. Everything is laid out through the design of the level itself, and it leaves it up to you to figure it all out. There were so many games this year, some that I've already mentioned earlier, that treat you like you are the stupidest person in the world, flashing you with PowerPoint slides on basic features, or voice actors getting paid to read lines that give away solutions to obstacles or puzzles, and that's not even getting into the epidemic of yellow paint that shows up in a ton of games. But here, none of that. Animal Well respects your intelligence by showing a short cutscene at the beginning of the game laying out your objectives, and then you're born out of a flower, and that's it. The rest is entirely up to you. And I have yet to hear people complain about that. Even with a lack of explanation, I found my experience to be buttery smooth. The game launches and loads in instantaneously, and I never got stuck on puzzles for too long. Because this is more of a Metroidvania-ish kind of puzzle game, I was afraid I was going to get stuck and stop playing. But that never happened. If I didn't know what to do, I knew I could simply take another path and discover something new, especially when I had new toys to play with by that point. It's simply a wonderful game. I love seeing it, I love hearing it, I love looking at it, I love playing it, and I can't recommend it enough. It's only 34 megabytes, guys. I'm sure it'll fit in your hard drive, no matter how full it is. Give it a shot. Game of the Year number 4 goes to Fallout London. For the first time ever, I am including a fan mod as Game of the Year, and I think it deserves it, because it's practically a brand new Fallout game. If it weren't for the fact that you need a copy of Fallout 4 in order to play this, I think you could get away with lying to people and say that it's a new game, and I think most people will fall for it. Because this is not just a reskin, or a tiny little London level with like 2 weapons. No, this is a whole ass new British world that is on the same size and scale as a regular Fallout 4 plus the DLC that came out afterwards. These developers did not mess around in making a legitimate Fallout experience with a new story, fully voice-acted characters, unique weapons, a ton of quests, new enemies, and even the Pip-Boy is a totally different device with its own interface. And oh my god, they even changed the terrible dialogue system from Fallout 4 and made it more similar to New Vegas. These guys know exactly what they're doing, and I love them for it. This is one of the few things that stand as improvements to the original Fallout 4. I would have been happy just keeping these quality of life improvements, but there's also a post-apocalyptic London waiting to be explored. There's a bunch of interior and exterior locations to scrounge around to discover a ton of handmade content made by a ton of fans that clearly love this series. And I know this is fan-made because one of the most common things that fans always do is take the game that they love and make it even more challenging and difficult. The enemies are way stronger, and ammo is extremely rare, at least in my experience. I mean, I even brought the difficulty down to as low as I could, and I was still getting bodied pretty easily. And because this takes place in London, there aren't that many guns to begin with. So most of the time you'll be scraping by with melee weapons and knives, and you will occasionally shoot people, which creates a totally different dynamic when it comes to surviving in a Fallout game. If you thought you could just Call of Duty your way through the whole thing, then you'll be met with either a rude awakening or having to wait a very long time for that one gunpowder pistol to load all the way to the end. The only bad thing that I would mention is that the loading times are atrociously long, and I had my game crash a ton of times as well. Even with all of the fixes that people recommended online, I was still coming across these issues: long loading times and crashes. It seems the devs are fully aware of this and are planning some updates in order to fix these issues, and, believe it or not, DLC that will further expand the game. So, DLC for a fan-made game, that's wild, and all of it is for free, by the way. Nobody is spending a single penny for Fallout London, with the exception of the copy of Fallout 4 that you will need if you don't have it already, considering how Fallout 4 is usually on sale for super cheap fairly frequently. If you're one of those people that love Fallout but you were disappointed by Fallout 4 and Fallout 76, and you're just begging for New Vegas to come back in some way, well, the fans worked extremely hard to give you Fallout London for free. I know that events like the Game Awards don't give prizes to fan-made works, but I really do feel that Fallout London should have won the Labor of Love category, because that's what this is, and I highly recommend you give it a chance. My number 3 game of the year is The Legend of Heroes Trails into Daybreak. Okay, look, this is like the 100th time that I have a Falcom game on my top 10 list, okay? You should know the drill by now. The Legend of Heroes games are amazing, and Trails into Daybreak is another one of those. What can I say that I haven't said a billion times already about this series? Great characters, awesome world building, beautiful graphics, and now slightly different combat mechanics. This time we have a mix between action combat and turn-based fights. I personally like keeping it to turn-based battles, but the action part is good for pushing away weaker enemies that would otherwise waste your time in going through the motions of a turn-based system. Other than that, it's pretty much the same Legend of Heroes that we all know and love. By this point, you already know if you like these games or not. I personally love them, and I know these characters better than my own family. If you don't know anything about this series, then just wait for the Trails in the Sky remake that's coming up this year so that you can join the club with everyone else that loves this series, okay? Moving on. Game of the Year number 2 goes to Caves of Qud. Very similar to Nine Souls, this game came out of nowhere for me. Apparently, this game has been in development for more than 15 years, and it just barely now hit the full 1.0 release status. I never knew that this game existed. but when I saw so many people get excited over it and saw the overwhelmingly positive reviews on Steam, I decided to give it a shot. And damn, this game is basically Baldur's Gate 3 if it ran on DOSBox. Yeah, the game looks super retro and old and looks like it traveled to the future from the 80s, but I swear to you this game is amazing. Damn near anything is possible in this game, and you know that's the case when a ton of positive reviews involve people telling stories of their own unique experiences with the game. That's how you know a game is good, when all of the Steam reviews barely review the game and they're just making references and sharing stories from their time playing. Caves of Qud is super difficult, like a true roguelike. It is an all or nothing experience, but that only creates new opportunities to make new characters with completely different builds to play around with. Character building is very engaging, being able to modify your character in so many creative ways that changes the way you play significantly. There's just enough of a balance between procedurally generated stuff and actual handmade content that I had an incredibly difficult time putting the game down. And even now, I don't feel like I'm anywhere near scratching the surface of what the game has in store. It's insane that I never knew this game existed up until now. It's actually kind of amazing, and it works really well with the gamepad too, which I was not expecting. I figured this game would be one of those like keyboard-only kinds of things, but gamepad controls are shockingly well implemented. Don't let the visual style fool you. This game is 100% worth your time and money. And now last but not least, Game of the Year #1 goes to Metaphor Fantazio. Despite all of the great games I've talked about up until now, I think this game was the biggest surprise for me. Yeah, it is made by Atlus, which is a good sign, but it's usually very difficult to get a new IP off the ground like this. Even with super successful franchises, you're not guaranteed to have the same level of success with a brand new game. It's not a Persona game, it's not a Shin Megami Tensei game, it admittedly has a very silly sounding name, and I generally didn't hear that many people talk about it. I was more than ready for this game to just perform okay, and have it slowly be forgotten as some weird offshoot to hold people over before the next Persona game comes out. But no, none of that happened. The game was incredibly well received, it sold a ton, and everyone is calling it one of the best games to come out in recent years, not just this year. And honestly, I am inclined to agree. After playing the game myself, I can tell you with full confidence that Metaphor Fantazio is damn near impeccable. I know that people say that there's no such thing as a perfect game, but man, I'm tempted to say that with this one. My favorite Shin Megami Tensei game of all time is Strange Journey, and I'm happy to see so much of Strange Journey's DNA in Metaphor Fantazio. Even down to the soundtrack, which sounds very similar to Strange Journey. The visuals are mind-blowing as well, as you would expect. After a game like Persona 5, pretty much any Atlus game after that had to follow it up with amazing visuals. This game is no exception, and because it has more of a medieval fantasy kind of vibe, then the way that they portray the menus and stuff are still very flashy, but flashy in its own very unique kind of way. The localization is a little bit iffy at times, but you won't really notice anything too weird if you don't have the Japanese voices on in order to compare it to the English text, which is what I've been doing, and that's the only reason that I see any differences to begin with. The story and the message that this game has to tell is unlike anything I've ever seen before. It is truly thought-provoking and mature, and I don't mean mature in the crappy way where game characters just curse a lot and do gratuitous violence. I mean a more humble kind of mature. It's almost like this story is told through someone that has lived a lot of life and has done a ton of self-reflection about how and why humans exist and what the creation of fantasy worlds means for us as a species. It actually reminded me a lot of the manga Phoenix by Osamu Tezuka, which also tackles the theme of human existence through space and time. But Metaphor handles this more through the perspective of storytelling, folklore, legends, and chasing after ideals that we create through fantasy stories that we tell to each other. The things that inspire us to be the best version of ourselves that we can be. It is so sincere and heartfelt and legitimately deep and is just so damn good. There are parts in this game that still leave me thinking about it for a long time after. And of course, the actual video game part of it is also very good. If you've played Persona 5, then you won't be totally lost here, but there are a bunch of different things here, like the archetypes you can transform into, which of course are kind of like Personas, but not quite. There are some very significant differences. But similar to Persona, you do have personality stats to develop, relationships to forge, you have the calendar system, a Velvet Room style area where you can tune up your archetypes, and a ton of dungeons with very challenging enemies, including humans, and bosses that force you to play intelligently. especially when the game doesn't allow you to switch your archetypes while you're in battle. So before you get into a fight, you really have to strategize and think about what you're gonna do. It even gets to the point where sometimes I know there's going to be a very difficult enemy, so I just let the enemy kill me. So then I know what their weaknesses are, and I know what they're resistant to and all that stuff. So when I reload my save, I can switch up my archetypes and all of my team members, so that then I can try it again, significantly more well prepared than I was before. It's really easy to just hand-wave this game off as just medieval Persona, and in a lot of ways, it kind of is. I mean, even the protagonist character looks the same as the protagonist from Persona 3, but I can assure you that even with these similarities, it is still a fantastic game that is 100% worth playing. Metaphor Fantazio blew me away from beginning to end, and if you're going to play any game from 2024, make sure that you at least play this one, especially if you're an Atlas fan. You know, if you're a fan of Persona or Shin Megami Tensei or even Etrian Odyssey and stuff like that, then I think Metaphor Fantazio is well within your wheelhouse. There's no reason for you to miss out on this. I highly recommend it. Go for it. So there you have it. That's another year of our lives over and done with, just like that. Thank you so much to everyone who's been listening this far into the video. If you don't mind, I would like to use this last part to give you all a bit of a channel/life update, since I'm not sure I might upload anything else after this. And that's considering how much motivation I had to muster just to sit down and finish this video. You might have even noticed that the writing in my last few list entries sounded a lot more brief, vague, and honestly pretty lazily done. That should tell you pretty plainly about where I'm at when it comes to the level of passion I have for YouTube nowadays. Even the game footage you're seeing now is most likely random recordings from years ago that I just dragged into my editing software, as opposed to something new I recorded just for this video. But anyway, life update. Long story short, things have been great. I reduced my internet usage, which has done nothing but wonders for me. I feel happier, less irritable, and it leaves me with a lot of free time to play games and pursue other artistic endeavors. That doesn't mean that I have completely cut myself off, mind you. Obviously, I do check in once in a while to see what's happening in the world. I know that a lot of people are immigrating over to Blue Sky because they hate Twitter. I know that at least. But I don't waste a lot of time doom scrolling or binging too many videos anymore. Instead, I've been pursuing Udemy courses and learning how to draw, how to use Blender, and play musical instruments. I found this type of content much more fun and fulfilling to binge than any YouTube brain rot that I would have wasted my time on instead. Speaking of artistic endeavors, I started to get into manga reading and manga creation. I thought it'd be fun, so that's been my main focus for most of this year. In fact, there was a comic book contest recently where you could submit your work, and I actually entered that contest, and you can read what I made. I'll leave a link in the description if you're interested and want to follow me there. I know it's super amateur and it looks like a 5-year-old was scribbling all over an iPad, but I am getting better at it a little bit every day, and I have a ton of ideas that I want to work with. Even if my drawings suck, I at least want to get a few stories out there. The documentary show Manben has been a great inspiration for me, and I love watching it and rewatching it in order to inspire myself to do more manga. I even bought myself one of those big drawing tablet screens, which I never in my life thought that I would do. But hey, here I am, trying something completely new, and I'm having a lot of fun with it. It's super exciting. I think this is the kind of fresh new start that I really needed in my life. In terms of more YouTube-related stuff, I'm not planning on making any new videos right now. I've grown to really dislike the current internet culture, and I'll be honest, I really don't feel like I belong here anymore. So I plan to continue not being here. Will I make another Game of the Year video for 2025? Maybe. I don't know. Big maybe. I have a lot of ideas, but whether I actually get around to making those ideas real is a whole other story. I mean, look, I'm gonna be frank with you. I'm just gonna put it this way. This is where I'm at right now. I changed the layout of my room significantly ever since I stopped YouTube. My cameras, my lights, my blue screen, all of that have been put away in the closet. Hell, I don't even have my microphone plugged in anymore. I had to dig this out of the closet just to record the voiceover that you're listening to now for this video. That's how serious I was when I said that I was done with all of this. To the point where it would be very difficult and honestly kind of annoying for me to hook up all of my equipment again in order to make new videos or record footage for games. And thank God that OBS is so easy to use, because honestly, if that was complicated to use as well, I think even this video would not have been made either. Speaking of which, now would be a good time to address something that a couple of viewers were asking me about. Where did all of my Senran Kagura videos go? Well, as much as I love all of those old Let's Plays, I unfortunately had to unlist and private them from my channel. That's mainly due to my day job and wanting to keep myself secure. Remember that people nowadays get cancelled over everything, and having a bunch of videos where my face is placed next to sexy anime games where high school girls get naked is not a good look for anyone that is associated with me. I have defended those kinds of games for years, and I still believe that they have a right to exist, like any other game, and nobody should ever be shamed for enjoying them. But other louder and more influential people obviously don't see it that way. People see anime out of context and immediately start accusing you of some horrible things that you have never done. And it's a bunch of drama and noise and misunderstandings that I would rather avoid completely. All it takes is for just one guy to complain, and it's all over. I am happy and stable as I am now, and I don't need a bunch of random videos of me having unhinged rants about trivial matters from 10 years ago to crop up and ruin everything. It's not worth it, so sadly, most of my content is gone. I understand that that might disappoint a lot of you, that's right, all 2 or 3 of you, but that's just how things have to be right now. If I ever become a super successful manga artist, or if I win the lottery, then I won't have to worry about anything, and I'll just make all of those videos public again. I wish things were different, and people didn't put so much stake into what people say online. But sadly, it is not 2005 anymore. In fact, it's been exactly 20 years since then. It's been 2 decades, and yeah. A lot of stuff has changed. Barely anyone makes online content for the pure pleasure of it anymore. It's all about money and getting a leg up in your career. Everybody has a brand, everybody has a following, sponsors, connections, and political ideologies that they want to protect. People care so much more about what you do online than what you do in real life now. So honestly, I am better off protecting myself and just making sure that my peaceful life stays that way. So yeah, if you're wondering why my Senran Kagura videos disappeared and a whole bunch of other stuff too, then sadly that's the reason. Okay, I don't think there's anything left for me to say. I talked about literally everything I ever wanted to talk about for the year, and now my throat hurts. So I think it's time for me to stop. Again, thank you so much to everyone for listening to this video. Thank you to all of my viewers for rocking with me for so long. And be sure to read my manga on Manga Draft or Pixiv whenever it comes out. I have a lot of exciting stuff planned for that, so don't necessarily look forward to videos coming out, but I do recommend that you keep an eye out for new manga releases from me. I hope everything goes well in your lives. I wish you all nothing but happiness and success, because right now, everything is pretty good with me. I'll see ya when I see ya. Bye-bye.